Mm. So you talked earlier about all those 700 odd succession plans.
For better or worse.
Yeah. Now, with people like Gen Z moving around, well, I'm not saying Gen Z, every generation when they're young move around every 2 years. That's just, there's no difference there. But I guess the reasons for moving around is probably different each
Mhm.
time. Is it worth a company doing a very detailed succession plan these days? What would you suggest to organizations?
I would suggest saying, listen, it's just like R&D. The only guarantee is failure if you don't invest at all.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Kristin Lytle. How are you doing, Kristin?
I'm doing really well. So excited to be here. How about you?
I'm doing really good actually, and I can't wait to discuss what we're going to discuss. But before we do that, what kind of strange question can I ask you? Do you have a favourite song or artist?
Oh goodness. Um, yes, but you're gonna reveal my nerdy side right away. Because my favorite song is actually an instrumental, old school Danish traditional folk music. And
Oh,
it's of this bridal trilogy, and it is the second. And it's just so beautifully composed. It's so wistful, but brings forth this just inspiration within. And so, yes, absolutely. I love pop music. I love classical music, all sorts of types. But if I'm ever having a moment, if I turn on Bridal Trilogy Part Two of this Dutch folk music, it just, I don't know, it's like a salve for the soul.
oh man, I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds really great. Kristin, tell us a bit more about you now.
Sure. So, Kristin Lytle, I am the newly minted, just over 30 days, but the newly minted CEO of Leader's Edge. And we're an executive coaching leadership development firm based in the US, mainly on the East Coast, but across the country as well. And we're really focused on helping organizations to stop wasting potential. And I say that because for the first 20 years of my career prior to coming to Leader's Edge, I was in corporate America. And majority of that time was spent in HR and talent roles. And despite each of the organizations I worked for being very highly ethical, very high integrity sort of organizations, I still saw so much potential in pipelines across the organization not being utilized and candidly simply being wasted in various ways that I decided I wanted to have a larger impact and made the move to Leader's Edge. And last month completed the purchase and of the organization and became its leader. So that's a bit about me professionally. Personally, I am originally from the Midwest. You'll occasionally hear it with an O or a this, O or an A. And um, but I've been married for 19 years to my wonderful husband, Rich, and we have an 8-year-old or almost 8-year-old beagle named Millhouse.
Oh, that sounds really good. Okay, so well done on being CEO, and 30 days in, it's kind of exciting. So you've got what, another 60 days before the honeymoon period's off then.
Yeah, there's definitely glimmers of it being off because again, so quickly you come into the realities of business ownership.
Yeah, yeah.
And things like, accounts receivable, accounts payable, all those sorts of things. But absolutely, I'm glad I had the time with our founder to learn the business over the last 2 years to
Nice.
really get into all those things that I need to do to ensure we're successful.
Brilliant. Well, a mission about stop wasting potential is a dream for me. My background is in HR, and it felt like if there was one thing that large organizations did really well, which was to squish the potential of people because it was easier in some respect. Like really big companies, easier to manage people that felt that they could only be a one thing within the organization rather than a curious creature that could move around and do lots of different things. And it was very easy for people to narrowly see, I hired you for this is what you can do, and then they don't grow. You just keep bringing in new people to do the thing that an existing person could do. So
Mhm.
you mentioned that you do talent identification and then its impact. So I'm guessing is a lot of what you're doing around the recruitment of somebody new, or is it now that you're in, let's find that talented thing and make that better?
It's a bit of both. So we do both onboarding and we do assessments for coming into organizations.
Right.
But I would say where we really focus a lot of our time and attention at Leaders Edge with our work is helping ensure that those who are identified don't suddenly get like pulled out of the process, pulled out of development, because I actually think that's the first issue is not identifying potential and talent inside of organizations. But I think even more so, it's a bit of it takes courage, unfortunately, to allow someone to stay in that pool as a leader, even when they make an error, even if they have a bad meeting with a board member. So helping individuals navigate through like the corporate labyrinth so that they don't end up not fulfilling their potential that has been identified. So that's a lot of the work we do with Leaders Edge, but I did spend, again, a good almost 20 years in succession planning rooms. My claim to fame is that I made the mistake of counting one time and I stopped when I got close to 700 succession meetings that I facilitated with senior leaders across my organizations over the years and saw so many reasons why people get screened out or get, I guess you could say, like bounced out of the list where people are willing to make investments in their talent because of minor snafus or errors that they might have made at one point or another.
Hmm. So thank you for that. Is it about the higher you go, the less patience you have with the people that make errors?
I think so. And I think candidly, it's this look the attribution error, the infamous of like when good luck comes to me, it was because I earned it. Good luck comes to someone else, the good fortune comes to someone else. They got lucky. I think very much so the more senior you get, the further away some of your earlier career moments get from you. And you might attribute it more to yourself and you're having
Mm,
known better versus recognizing you might have had a mentor that warned you about how to prepare for that meeting, or someone might have helped you along the way. And too often it can be, well, it's because I've worked really hard and this person just isn't getting it. And so
mm.
I think it is a mixture of both patience as well as willing to many leaders being willing to paint themselves in this positive light of how they got to where they are without really thinking deeply about it.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Could education styling differences in attribution when you're talking about the gaps in different generations? Because
I think
go on, sorry.
no, please do.
Because what I was thinking is that, for a long time, it was the singular person. You on your own work this out. You on your own sit that exams. You do this project. And now there's more of us together will work together and do this. But if you're raised in an area where everything is collaborative, and then you go to a supposedly modern organization, it's a bit of a shock, isn't it?
Mm,
So,
yes.
and you're less likely to fight individually for your development because you're used to collectively doing things.
As well as what is collective, I think you're used to your work being able to speak for you, and
Mm,
because other people are in there with you and
that's a
seeing
good
it.
point. Yeah, yeah.
And so often we assume that others will see our work
Mm,
and just notice it. And sometimes it's they're too busy. Sometimes they don't understand it. Sometimes if you're working on something that's solving a problem that's not yet a problem versus firefighting,
mm.
people might not notice that you did something or prevented an issue or something along those lines. And if you came from a very collaborative environment, you might not know that you need to highlight that because you're used to people seeing it as a result of working together.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen it when I've been mentoring people where one, highly talented person is doing some work, collaborating with somebody else, but the other person is stealing the credit. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, oh, but we all work together, so it's fine. And it's like, no, it matters because everyone's going to assume that the other person's done the work. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter because no, it matters because if you're in that collaborative mindset, you're not looking out for yourself singularly as well.
Exactly. Exactly. And we need more. What I like to talk about with my coaching clients and with our clients at Leaders Edge is we across the world, we need more high integrity leaders in positions of power and
Mm.
decision making. You can
Hmm.
look across any domain, business, government, and see leaders that maybe don't have the highest integrity or are self-interested.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I've pretty much come to the conclusion that we can't really screen them out that well. We can have ethical policies, we can have leadership models, we can even have legislation, like here in the US, we have Sarbanes-Oxley.
Hmm.
But those lower integrity leaders will always find a way to kind of wiggle in. And so if we can better teach individuals with high integrity how to ensure that they're navigating effectively and efficiently through an organization, let's crowd out those
Hmm.
lower integrity leaders. Let's not leave a space at the table for them to wiggle into because they'll figure out a way. Pick up any newspaper or open an app of a news app, and we'll see examples of leaders who have wiggled their ways into positions of power or decision making that has impact on so many other individuals in their organization and out.
Hmm. I think you get what your culture supports, doesn't it? I mean, if you look at some of those high, high notable financial issues with these companies, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to go, your culture highlighted that you value, this and you pay people the same based on this. And then they did this behavior. Why is this a surprise? If you think about some of these financial ones and you bonus people in a certain way
Mm-hmm.
with very little checks, and then you
Absolutely.
celebrate them for doing the things that but like the rest of the industry doesn't do because it's wrong or illegal. It's not surprising they'll do things that's wrong and illegal because that's what they're being celebrated for.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's culture like inside of an organization really just boils down to what behaviors are rewarded. And then also what maybe not so great behaviors are tolerated. So they
Hmm.
might not be punished or they might not be this, but they're tolerated. And just like anything else, we're social creatures. And so we look, unfortunately, to other models within our ecosystems or our organizations, and people learn what's okay and what's going to be tolerated, exactly as you were saying. And
You
so
know
it's
what?
not surprising that if you don't have the right leaders at the top, they're not going to be modeling the best of behaviors.
You know what? I just when you spoke, it just made me think that culture is the lowest denominator
Hmm.
that you will accept, isn't it? It's the
Yes.
lowest
Actually,
denominator that
I
you will
often say
accept.
that, but I didn't want to start out by sounding too negative, but that's absolutely what I believe is what are some of the worst behaviors that are tolerated or ignored in an
Yeah.
organization? Because that's, if you
Okay.
think, you've probably had this with your coaching clients too. If you ask about an organization, as many good things as someone will recall about the culture of an
Mhm.
organization, what they remember first are the negative things that were tolerated or ignored.
Mm. Let's listen to a quick advert.
The Maverick Paradox. Judith Germain is an author, speaker, consultant, mentor, and trainer, and the leading authority on Maverick leadership. She is the founder of the Maverick Paradox, which supports organizations to enhance their leadership capabilities and to help business owners develop and grow their businesses. Judith enables individuals, business owners, and organizations to improve their impact and influence. She is also HR Zone's leadership columnist, and her expert opinion has appeared in national, international, and trade press.
Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious. Because I was reading, thank you for that. I was just reading something this morning and it was saying, I can't remember now what the percentage was, but it was something like 75% or 85% of people are looking for jobs. They're like looking to move. And I'm thinking, pre-COVID, the old adage of, I hate my job, but the people are great, so I'm not leaving. Well, if you don't see the people, then you're a bit stuck, isn't it? So it's no surprising if nothing has changed in between that's gone up. So I'm wondering, how does an organization find that? How do they identify the talent that they want, whether that's or whether through the onboarding process, or more importantly, I think is like, the people that have been there for years. How do they find that right talent, and what can they do to make sure it is impacting the culture in the way that they want it to?
Mm-hmm. I think it comes down to recognizing what are the problems that this organization is here to solve.
Mm.
And very much just starting with that.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple of I think standard things that will be part of who do you want to invest in that are consistent no matter what. And I'll mention those in a moment. But first and foremost, instead of saying who we are today, but what are the problems we think this organization is going to be solving for our clients, for our customers, for the market in the future? What sort of behaviors or characteristics are most critical in order to make that happen? So it can be more, because there's all these sorts of things that I used to call it the walk on water potential model. Meaning when you start to ask leaders, what are all the things that are important in order to be a leader here? Suddenly there's this list that's like, gosh, you would have to be able to walk on water to fulfill all of those. But starting off with, what are the problems the organization wants to solve? And then you work backwards to say, okay, what are the characteristics? What are the behaviors? What are the traits of someone? Is it being agile? Is it being curious? And thinking about those as to what is the most important for that. That being said, what always needs to be present is this looking at who has self-awareness and who has the ability to use a psychological term of self-regulate, essentially ensuring who's aware of the impact they have on others and who's able to understand if that impact is not great at a particular moment. Because we all have our moments. Do they self-adjust? Are they able to take a bit of a time out for themselves and grab a breath, have a tea, calm down, and not spread that frustration or the discontent throughout the day? Because those two things alone, if all leaders were self-aware and you had to self-regulate, I mean, that alone, the impact it would likely have, right?
I love the idea of self-regulating leaders, because that would change quite a lot, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. So I sometimes tell the story of, I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in the airport in Milwaukee, right after you go through security, there's this area with a little sign, and it's called the recombobulation zone. And it's a made-up word. They've interviewed people from the airport. They said it is a made-up word, but it's total Milwaukee humor. We just want to make you smile because you went through something stressful. You've got your kids with their shoes off and, all those sorts of things, and trying to remember your laptop. And so it's just literally where you go and you put your shoes on, your belt on, your laptop back in your bag, and it's just a little bit calmer there. But I like to use this as a metaphor for leadership because so often we'll come across things that make us feel a little discombobulated. Someone gives us tough feedback or a meeting didn't go the way we wanted. And to me, the great leaders versus the decent leaders are the ones who can first and foremost recognize they're discombobulated. And two, realize, okay, I need to take a moment in my little personal recombobulation zone. And whether that's taking a few deep breaths, whether that's taking a walk around the block, whatever the case might be, they're cognizant to not spread that discombobulation to everybody else they meet during the day.
Oh, that is absolutely so true. I write about that in my book, actually, the impact that you can have with your mood and how that, even without thinking about it, you can infect a whole organization.
Yes, yes. It's a bit of, we teach people not to worry too much about spotlight effect, where we always think everyone's watching us all the time. And while that's true, I think as a leader, we need to be mindful of a small spotlight effect of our teams are watching our mood and what's important to us and what we're prioritizing. And can I give them the feedback about how that project's going on a given day or not?
Yeah.
If they feel like there's a lot of variability in our moods.
I remember there was this organization where one of the leaders of the organization would sometimes sign a kiss in their email, like a little X, and sometimes not. But if you did not get a kiss, people would talk about not getting the kiss and the meaning of not getting the kiss. What did that mean? Did we do something wrong? Let me just rewrite that email. And, you could see people take hours talking about the real meaning of not getting it and how does that link to this, and did they smile at you that morning? And it was just, I'm pretty sure that individual would never have imagined the effect of putting an X or not putting an X.
And you think of all the mental calories burned.
Yep.
Analyzing.
Work stop. People would meet in huddles to see whether that meant that person was on the out or not. I mean, it was just like, I don't need a kiss. How did they feel? How did they look like this morning? Are they in a good mood? What does that mean?
Was it me or was it just their day?
Yeah. Did you get a kiss today? It's just crazy.
And that's why I think with having more transparency about how we meaning any given organization identify talent and who we invest in is critically important, because that can go from an individual leader to one of my organizations had an employee resource group where once a year there was a big signature event. And because they didn't have a lot of transparency in their other talent practices, it was interpreted as, oh, I'm seen as having higher potential if I get invited to this annual meeting. And it had nothing to do with that. And in fact, I dug further into it, and it turns out it was just held at a location that had limited space, and they were trying to rotate. But people would say, oh, I was invited 2 years in a row. Now I'm not invited. I must no longer be high potential. And it turned into this whole thing because there wasn't having impact as to, how do I interpret this? How do I think about it? Am I valued? Should I be taking that recruiter call? All those sorts of things because someone didn't get invited to an employee resource group summit.
So you talked earlier about all those 700 odd succession plans.
For better or worse.
Yeah. Now, with people like Gen Z moving around, well, I'm not saying Gen Z, every generation when they're young move around every 2 years. That's just, there's no difference there. But I guess the reasons for moving around is probably different each time. Is it worth a company doing a very detailed succession plan these days? Like a traditional, as I say, really, really detailed succession plan in the next 10 years or next 5 years, when 3 years can feel like a long term in an organization. What would you suggest to organizations?
I would suggest saying, listen, it's just like R&D. The only guarantee is failure if you don't invest at all. We can't predict which products will make it through the process or be popular in the market. We don't know exactly who's going to stay. But this is about providing us as an organization with options in the future. In fact, we don't know exactly what parts of our business unit are going to grow and excel. So we don't know which parts of the business we're going to need more talent, et cetera. But if we don't invest in anyone, then we're not going to have options. And that's not a great situation to be in. And so instead, let's think about, instead of having always detailed succession plans, because of course at more senior levels, that makes sense. But maybe at more mid and more junior levels, it's about preparing pools of talent so that you have options. And thinking about what are those no-fail bets as to how can we get someone ready? So if you're an investment, you mentioned finance firms, and I spent my time in one as well. So, having people study for certain exams and accreditations, that's almost a no-fail bet because you're going to need individuals who have those licenses and accreditations in the future. And so maybe they'll use it with you, maybe they won't. But the only guarantee is failure if you don't have anyone that you've invested in that way.
That makes sense. That makes sense. But I suppose my view is there are certain things now more than ever that you absolutely need to have, which will set you in good stead regardless of what the future does. And that's to have as many, if not all of your employees able to think properly.
Yes.
So that they can actually, and it sounds silly, but there's an art and a skill to actually thinking. So you want to make sure you've taught them how to think properly, whether specifically around lateral thinking, so that you can take the linear logical thinking and the creative and emergent thinking and merge that together. to come up with something
I
interesting.
love that. And I also think that looking at it simply as to who stays and who goes is very limiting.
Mm,
So, I think organizations need to think about how are we treating people? How are we investing in people? And if they choose to move on, continue to treat them well. Because I will tell you, with one of my previous employers, I am still to this day advocating for them. And I've had high
yeah,
potential people in my network reach out to me and say, what do you think about working for this organization? And I highly advocate for it. And I push these individuals to go and look at this organization. So it might not be quite as direct of an impact as I would have had if I was still working there, but because of how they treated me, because of how they invested in me, I've continued to funnel good talent to them to
that's right.
help them with their own success.
And you will do the same as a consumer. Yeah,
Exactly. Oh,
because
I'm very loyal to this company from as a
because
consumer.
yeah, because otherwise you'd be like, oh, I wouldn't buy from them because you know how they treat their people. So
Exactly.
and I think the other thing as well is apart from being able to think properly, because tragically that isn't taught in schools. That's also leadership. So I think that leadership needs to be given. Everybody needs to be leaders, whether you sweep the floor or you run the business. Because if you have everybody operating as leaders, then it's a better place to work. You get better ideas, great for the consumer, more cost effective, blah, 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 loads and loads and loads of benefits to that. So I think leadership development is an essential trait because when things go wrong or you need to anticipate change, it's the leaders that make it happen.
Absolutely.
Not the
Absolutely.
title of leadership, but the leaders make it happen.
Mm-hmm. No, you're exactly right. And again, imagine if a company were to invest in how to help people think and be decisive, as you say, and have more of an impact, as well as have self-awareness and
Mhm.
self-regulation or recognize when you're discombobulated, why would people leave?
Mm. It's true,
Like
isn't it?
it really think about why people leave organizations. Sometimes it has to do with the work, but more often it has to do, I think it was Amy Gallo said in the beginning of one of her recent books of how to work with like anyone, even difficult people. She had this line at the very beginning of when I look back at my career and I reflect on if I had a good day or a bad day, it was largely due to those I interacted with and
Yeah.
how those interactions went.
Mhm.
And so if people look to their days and they're not frustrated, they're not burning mental calories, trying to discern does the X mean something or not,
Mhm.
and why would they go anywhere?
Yeah. And also the customer feels it, isn't it? Because if you're micromanaging, the customer feels what that micromanagement. If you feel that that the organization looks after you and you're happy to work there, the customer feels that as well.
Hmm.
And
Exactly.
again, this morning I was reading this article. It feels like it's not a European thing. Mainly, I think because we have so many laws that make it harder to do this, but to have multiple full-time jobs. And so this article was suggesting that some the people they were interviewing for the article who had like three, I don't know how you have three full-time, I don't know how that happens, but they were saying that the people were doing it not because they needed the money per se, the individuals that they were interviewing. It was because they couldn't trust any one of the three organizations to have their back. So it was like, I will work with all three because if one of them lets me go, I'm still covered. I can still pay my mortgage, I can still feed myself. So it was
Hmm.
almost like having more than one full-time employer was giving you the safety that you used to get with one full-time employer,
Right.
which
It
is
goes
quite
back,
tragic. It made me sad.
it is. And it shows that again, like people. So a number of years ago, I was working on this of like what makes people trust an organization. I was trying to
Mm,
answer this question for my own self with some of the work I was doing. And I was asking a number of people, what does trust mean? What does trust mean to you? Of course, I looked it up in the dictionary and
yeah.
whatnot. And then I turned to the source that if I ever want a contrary answer, will always give me one or an answer that will be unexpected, and that is my husband. And
That's handy.
So sometimes I wonder why I ask, but usually I see the wisdom sooner than later. But in the moment, I sometimes wonder why I asked. But I asked him, what is trust? And he goes, you know what trust is? Trust is when I can predict what you're going to do. And at first I was like, no, you're wrong. Like, what if you're a jerk? Do I trust you to be a jerk? Right?
Yeah, you do.
And the more I thought about it, though, is he was so right. Because again, in this story you're mentioning of these people who have 3 employers, they can't predict what any of these employers are going to do. They can't predict that if the employer says, hey, we see value in you and we want to invest in you, that they will follow through on that. They don't trust that if they haven't gotten any tough feedback during the year, that they're not going to get, a low review or whatever the case might be. So if they can't predict within reason what the outcome is going to be of something, that erodes all trust. Would you agree?
Absolutely. One of the things I say when I'm doing training or whatever, to leaders is that people want certainty. They want to know, they want to be predicted. They're not going to come to you with a bad problem if they think you're going to go crazy on them. They want to go, oh, I can bring it to Kirsten because she's going to ask me what I've learned from it and we can move forward. She's not going to blame me for it. Or I'm not going to go to David because he's going to flip out like crazy and I'm going to be running and hiding behind my desk.
Exactly. And that's, again, it goes back to if people can trust the leaders they work with, and then they can trust the organization to follow through on the standards that are essentially advertised as part of the recruiting process, then again, and they feel like they're growing, there's really not the desire to make that change. And of course, things will happen. People's spouses get different jobs and they need to relocate, or someone goes back to school. Like, those sorts of things happen, but let's face it, that's the minority of the time when someone leaves an organization. More often, it's they feel like they can essentially trust the future organization to either pay them more fairly according to market or grow them as they said they would, et cetera, et cetera.
I agree. So before we end then, Kristin, is there anything particular that you want to share with the audience?
I would say that if you're a leader, one of the things that you can do to help talent pipeline health is to support the individuals fully that have been identified as future leaders. And instead of looking to see what is it that they haven't done right, look to see what they are doing or what support could they utilize to bolster them, and how is it that you're investing in ensuring their success. Because far too often we'll see people get identified and then for various and many reasons within an organization, they don't always stay in those high potential lists. And so, a high potential future leader, pick the label that you want, but ensuring that you have courage and fortitude in supporting those who you do believe can become leaders, even in the tough days.
I love that. Catch people doing something right.
Exactly. Because it's so often that we only really rely on corrective behaviors or corrective coaching versus helping to identify, here's what you do really well, and here's what you should probably know that you do really well, because sometimes when it comes so naturally to the individual, they might not even realize how special it is. I often like to say it's hard to read the ingredient label when you're inside the package.
Oh, I like that. I certainly know if I'm doing a coaching program with somebody, I like to tell them what I see. This is the sense between when we started here and where we are now. These are the things that I've seen that's different. Because sometimes, as you say, you make these changes and you're in it, so you can't see it. So it's sometimes it's good to have a third person saying, wow, have you realized what you've achieved? Just to have that conversation. Kristin, it's been great having you on.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to have this great conversation and hear from your perspective. This was, honestly, I'm most looking forward to this today because it's a rare treat to get to talk talent with another talent person. And I knew I would learn. And so I was excited and very honored to have been here.
Brilliant. Thank you. I've enjoyed it as well. As you say, talent isn't something that people talk about much these days. I think we just assume that it's there, but we don't have to do anything to nurture it. It's just like
Exactly.
just pop out when we need it. We just press a button and that talented individual just goes, "Zzz, what do you need? Here's what I've got for you."
I used to jokingly say, if there's two things I know about corporate America, it's one, how to run an integrated talent succession management system. The other thing I know is that in those systems, people don't magically show up when you need them.
True. That's true.
Those are the two things I know. I know those cold.
And complicated systems mean you won't put much information in it, so you wasted your money anyway. So
exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Exactly. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you out there for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I am Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.